Welcome to the 11th episode of the Revolutionary Star Season 2 for the year 2021, broadcasting live and direct from Harare, Zimbabwe, to the comfort of wherever you are right now in our global world. Today is Sunday, the 11th of July 2021, and we are going to be talking on Zanu PF 2030, a glimpse into the possible future of Zimbabwean politics post 2030. Welcome, as I said before. Today we're going to be having our first interview, if you want to put it that way, out of the studio, and we're going to have a guest as we discuss and delve into these Pan Africanist issues, how Zimbabwe is going to look like once these Madaras have long gone and a new generation that is post the liberation struggle, Born Free from the 1980s take over. So we're going to have our first guest at the Revolutionary Star. I hope you enjoy this interview that we had out of our studios, and we will be finding more. If you liked it and you want to see more of these type of interviews, please let us know, inbox us, subscribe on YouTube, and tell us which people you want us to go and interview for our future podcast. Thank you again. This is Comrade Super Cabral, Roger out. Welcome, comrades. This is our first interview that we're doing out of the studio. I would like to welcome Uncle Sekuru. As you all well know here at the Revolutionary Star, we always try and find people who are like-minded, who are in that same Pan-Africanist vein of which we as Zimbabweans here in Southern Africa are trying to align. We are here with Uncle Sekuru. He's in the same vein as Amilcar Cabral, economist, agronomist, based on our indigenous way of thinking that we have told you in previous podcasts, which is enthused with the liberation struggle. So today's topic is going to be on Zanu PF, an insight into Zimbabwean politics, a glimpse into how that's going to look like post-2030. We'd like to introduce Uncle Sekuru. Uncle Sekuru, thank you for having us at the Revolutionary Star podcast. You are our first and official guest here. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thanks for I don't know if I deserve to wear that crown, but yeah, thank you for the introduction.
Now, just to give you a quick brief about here at the podcast, we are a Pan Africanist podcast. We truly want to see a change in the way personality politics is done. At the same time, we are more in the line of all Pan-Africanist and liberation type of struggles based on the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Amilcar Cabrals, and trying to make that modern so that a person who is not really from the guerrilla generation would understand these type of topics. So having you today, we think we're privileged enough to at least start on some things that our viewers have already been listening to. We've had previous podcasts where we've talked about Amilcar Cabral, about how an economy, agriculture, and politics are all combined. It's not just about being a revolutionary, which means just picking up a gun. So we try and always touch on these type of topics, and having you here today, we thought maybe you could give us a little bit more insight when we look at a topic like Zanu PF 2030 and Zimbabwean politics, because a lot of people end up thinking that politics is just about when it's a campaign time, which we all know is not true. So without further ado, I know you've talked about this a lot of times, about short-termism. Could you please explain to our viewers here, our fellow cadres, what does it mean when you say a person is a short-termist, and what type of wisdom does this short-termism? Let's start with short-termism. What is short-termism?
So, once again, thanks. So until recent years, maybe 2018, 2019, short-termism was a phrase that was written in courts, meaning it was not really a formal word, a formal phrase. So to break it down, Oxford now describes it, because Oxford eventually listed it, as a concentration of short-term projects or objectives for immediate profit at the expense of long-term security. So the last part is what's vital. Long-term security at the expense of long-term security. So one would think concentrating on short-term projects is actually a positive thing in business, but it's really not. Basically, short-termism is what I think is affecting almost every sector of our politics and economics in Africa per se, or actually in every third world or in every have-not culture if not in courts here. If the first world is controlled by debt and credit, right? You know the term "till death do us part."
Yes.
Even marriages are bound by debt.
Yeah.
Business is controlled by debt. And management of debt. So I don't think the way I phrase it now would make it sound I'm saying debt is a bad thing. No, it's not. If you manage it, you know what? That's what corporate culture is. You can manage your debt, then you actually on the line of to success in corporate culture.
So let me hold you up right there for a second. You mentioned debt, then you just explained to us about what it means to define short-termism. I want to take this into a Zimbabwean perspective, local. Let's look at local issues. Would you say that Zimbabwe right now is in a short-termism mind frame? For example, I'll take, when we look at not only Zanu PF but MDC, where good ideas are always being spoken of all the time. We have MDC that came up with their smart manifesto. Then we also have, of course, Zanu PF has always been churning out different platforms. But we never end up seeing what we call substantive development that is done in these projects. They're always halfway. Is this an example of a short-termist type of mind frame? And can you blame a party, or can it actually diffuse right down to an individual, where you can say that it now affects the individual itself, himself or herself, who has also now become short-termism? I don't know if you could speak on that.
Okay. So what's interesting about what you mentioned is you went to the myopia of politics in Zimbabwe, like the short-sightedness, which is directly linked to short-termism.
Okay.
This could be broken down to be the ultimate cause of our failure to govern even our whole country, whether it was an opposition or as a leading country, the whole continent, or even the problem can even extend to even Latin American countries. And here's why. I'm going to look at short-termism at a very, very not so deep perspective. So a mindset of a person who joins an opposition political party, for example, can be really blocked from making progress by short-termism. We saw a period of high-end opposition parties in Zimbabwe, opposition party leaders switching sides overnight to the ruling party. That can actually be viewed as short-termism. Like, you went in because you thought life was easy in there, you wanted to make your money and run.
Interesting.
Right?
Interesting.
So when you realize that, you know what, I've been going on back and forth, like 5 years, 10 years now. I'll give you an example. Let me be very fair and take Mr. Komichi, for example. You are in MDC. You've tried your best. Komichi, I remember at one time, was known as the man with the biggest incarceration record in MDC. Then one day he just woke up. He's a nobody.
Right.
And these young bloods are coming in, they're getting big posts. It's very easy for that person to actually say, look, I have a family to feed. Where has this taken me? Right? So would we say he was a short-termist? In a way. Because the way he looked at it is there's two things that are affected here. The politics of personalization come in, which is idolization. This idolization, by this time, when people are now focusing on idolizing their leader as opposed to the ideas that the leader they have.
A personality cult somewhat.
Right, idolization versus ideology.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So, if you go into politics and you expect it's time to eat, that's actually a short-termist mindset. Because Rome wasn't built in a day, one. A lot of things can happen. Things are not going to go the way you planned, right? The Israelites spent how many years in Egypt? Yeah. Some didn't even make it there. Exactly. So if they had said, you know what, if I start this journey with Moses to go to back to Canaan, I'm going to die on the way. Let me stay here. Well, that's exactly how a short-termist mindset is. That's how you end up having politics and switching from one party to another. You can easily take an opposition member here in Zimbabwe, put him in a ruling party, and they'll fit in right there within 2 weeks. You can do that. You can do the reverse. You can take it.
I like the way you're going, because even if we're saying the topic of Zanu PF, what you're defining here is that if I'm to get this correct me if I'm wrong. Let's take away the veneer of politics, the usual backbiting or trying to get a sound bite, and look at the fundamentals first of what it makes for the playing field to actually have something that we can actually call as political dialogue within a system. And if I'm getting what you're saying correct, is you're saying that short-termism is where we have this problem. You can't even talk about a Zanu PF or an MDC in 2030 if the fundamentals on the ground are not conducive enough for us to even get to that situation. Is that somewhat what you're saying?
Yes, and to make it clear, I'm saying, to finish your sentence just made, we can't make it anyway if everything that we're doing is for now. Now. Me, and now. Politics is about country. Politics is about nation. Politics is about progress and about production, development, but not in a short-term perspective. Because it takes a long time, generations and generations, to change a system. And it takes longer to create a system. And creating and forming a system is one element. Keeping and holding the system is another element. Making the system conducive for everybody is the most difficult and hardest part of all this.
Okay, so saying that now, explain this system, because you seem to be describing a dire system.
Okay, so let me go back and try to. It will be very difficult for me to talk about this without talking about corporate culture, because I've seen billboards, I've seen politicians here talking about corporate, talking about when the war ended. Late 79, back into 1980, songs were out there, and one of the things that Vakomana by the comrades, and one of the things that Zanu PF preached was socialism. Yes. Saying one social word would atidi socialism, atidi capitalism, so that's socialism. So we branded capitalism as the devil. The devil, yes. Right? So, but look at us, 30 years down the line, everything that we're doing is actually going on the trajectory of capitalism. But do we understand what capitalism is? No, we don't. Okay. We still look at capitalism as something that is negative. But if you look at it, China, prior to the year 2000, maybe prior to the early 2000s, was still called a communist country. Yes. Then all of a sudden there's Starbucks there, then there's iPhone, then there's Apple. I mean, there's everything there, and oh wow, they just woke up one morning and they're capitalists. Is it so easy to change one ism to the other like that? No, it's not. Right? But the thing is, it took years for them to go into a system. What China did, some people can call it a trickle-down effect. Okay. You enforce laws, you enforce rules that work for you. You put an iron hand on it. When they work, it trickles down to everybody. Bring them out from poverty, bring them out to where you are, right? But that took years to do that. Right. Like some might even link it to the actual Chinese Revolution, if you want to look at it. Yeah, it did take years. So that's an example of a long-term project, and that's an example of a long-term process. But how many years would you accredit to China's success? Minimum is 30 years, if we agree. Right?
So here we are in Zimbabwe. We already have a short-term problem. And
we do. And what I'm saying is, and I was about to explain why I would literally call it a short-term problem. And it's not only in Zimbabwe, it's in everybody who is not standing on their own feet. Doesn't matter where you are. If you cannot, let's suppose you're 18, high school, you meet your high school sweetheart that is 17, and you have kids. It's going to be very difficult for you to stand on your own feet, because the pressure of learning life is still within you. You actually, bread and butter issues always be knocking on your door before you think of investment. So if you notice, nobody talks about investment in Zimbabwe, because
we have a hustler mentality these days.
Let's break down again why, because I want to link investment to corporate culture. Okay. What is an investment? Investment, if you look at it in African terms, how you can invest. Zimbabweans are not new to investment, like old school Zimbabweans. Investment is when you create an entity that you put money into, and then after some years, that money that you put into, you'll recover that money. After recovering that money, that entity will still keep on pouring that money that you managed to create within it. So, for example, it's like a golden goose. You bought a goose.
Something like how Anasekuru do with invest in cows or in livestock. Is that an example of investment?
Right. But then, see, the only difference with it was how they would acquire the cows. Usually, our Sekurus would acquire the cows from marriage, from their daughters. So they would look at kids as part of investment. So if you look at one of the major changes that is happening in our culture, because what I want to talk about is culture versus corporate here. Okay. Our culture versus corporate culture. Yeah. If you look at it, men wanted to have girls as their offsprings, because they'll say, you know what, right? Yeah. So they would tie. Back in the day, our culture was, for a lack of a better way of putting it in a kind words, our culture looked at kids like livestock, like their investment. They would take care of me when I grow up. Right. The more kids I have, the more money I'm going to have when they get married. Right? Okay. Yes. Yeah. So it really was a way of it. It was hypermetropia, opposite of myopia, but at the same time, the system changed. Our culture has literally shifted. We are now adopting capitalism. We are now adopting capitalism, which is led by one thing: corporate state of mind. right?
Explain corporate state of mind, because I'm sure even I may not really understand what does that mean.
So, corporate is defined as anytime you mention corporate, it's relating to a large group of company.
Okay.
The world is run by large groups and companies. That's the simplest way I can explain corporates.
Right.
But where do large groups and companies keep their money? Through banks, and banks are part of corporates.
Right.
So, for example, the easiest way to really look at corporate is consortiums and people coming together, forming one company. They sell their shares, and everything is done through the bank, or everything is done through shareholders. Well, now there's cryptocurrency now, but we'll get into that later. So, a system where corporates pretty much determine the politics in that country.
But giving myself as an example, I was taught to see these people as evil. Hapana chivanu, hapana ubuntu.
Okay, so this is why I mentioned now, like, we really have to find an understanding of how does our culture fit into the corporate culture, because inevitably everybody is gravitating towards corporate culture.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
Okay.
Because corporates eventually they end up handling everybody. You end up having everyone's money. You end up having everybody's. If you are not part of it, corporates will make sure that you won't make it. That is the reason why you cannot go and start, and you can be the best chef in the world, making the best burgers in the world. But there's no way you can take your burgers and put them next to Burger King and still make money. Burger King, whoever works, make money.
Because it's got the
right?
brand.
People are looking at it just as like, oh yeah, this is a franchise. No, but franchise, the framework of a franchise is designed the framework of a corporate.
This is where you're saying the system. The system comes in with I cannot come and have a bigger spot opposite Burger King, because Burger King already created a system and a brand and a machine that no matter what I do, I cannot compete against this behemoth.
Right. So in corporate culture, it's pretty much being good is not good enough.
Wow.
Okay. You see what I mean? So it's one of those questions like, would you rather be lucky than be good, right? Lucky all the time or good all the time? You're better off if you're lucky all the time, right?
That's turning it upside on its head, but go on.
Okay, so what I mean is corporate cultures make sure that you are lucky all the time.
Oh, I see.
Does that make any sense?
Based on the system that they've
created. So if you really look at it, being good, it doesn't necessarily mean you are going to reap any benefits when the corporate culture exists. Because your weight has to be got out there. So you have to create a network, marketing here, service here, production here. You need all that, and not one person can do that, right? So if you really look at it, you can always look at, they have systems that are figured out. Systems that operate. There's a certain MO for marketing, certain MO for production, certain MO for segmentation, certain MO for advertising, certain MO for production, and certain systems that they put in place. But let me rewind it back and keep this very simple, right? There is no way you can survive without banks and without the World Bank and without the IMF if you ever think about what I'm about to say next.
Okay.
We are using currency, this whole world. Our fiat currency is one that when it was decided, none of us were there.
True.
A bunch of old men just sat and said, hey, our dollar here is what the whole world is going to use. Right? So they just took papers from the back of their heads and said, hey, let's use this paper here. That's what currency is. Right? Africans were very far from that. So when do we get to a point where our currency is in equilibrium with currency that is just created from Norway?
I don't see that ever happening.
Right. So for that reason, there is no way out. We're going to have to play ball with them. We're going to have to follow by their own rules. So we don't have, for us to be able to get to a point where we decide our own fate. We have to find ways of sinking our resources into a corporate system where they feel like they need us more than we need them.
But Uncle, what you just said there has been tried in several African countries, and it's never been successful. So even here in Southern Africa, we're looking at a system whereby we were given an institutional British system, right? This is the bureaucracy we were given. But we came in from the bushes with a socialist, communist way of thinking. We tried to match that, and you've seen the results.
No, we never tried to match it, because what happened, you're talking about, see, I was going to go and talk about that. This is why I agreed to come to the topic of the Zanu PF 2040. There is a big chasm that was created between the fighter, the one that stayed at home, and the one that is running the economy now. There's a break of communication here. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you went and fought the war, you're going to understand the nature of what you fought for.
But some revolutionaries from the war understood that. Others did not.
Did they? But here's where I'm going to talk about grandfathering here.
Yes.
Those that understood it, did they pass it on to the ones that succeeded them?
That has been difficult to do, unfortunately.
Actually impossible. That's why you never see, I don't mean to target people, but you never see a highly successful politician here with a highly successful offspring as a politician or as a business person. So remember here, the people that are actually making Zim, if you look at the Zim top 20 of the people who are making out their investment, they have no clear connection to a father who was that successful. Who was equally successul.
But why is that though?
I'm going to go back and quote the remember the creator of they say the creator of Dubai, right? Okay. I remember I sent it to you a couple of days ago. He said something that I thought was very interesting, and whether he said it or not, is something that you and I have always talked about and always repeated all the time.
Okay.
It's easy to pass on wealth from one person to the other, right? But it's not that easy to pass on how that wealth was attained. Does that make any sense?
Yes, I get it. I get that, but the passive knowledge.
Right.
Most parents try and infuse this by having their kids learn it practically. So, if possible, or creating environments where they don't necessarily need to do the activity, but they end up doing the activity so as to maybe glean a little bit of that transference you're talking about. I'm not sure if that's correct.
In a way, but it's actually almost opposite what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Let me repeat what Sheikh Rashid was supposedly saying. He said, hard times create strong men. Strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men. Weak men create difficult times. Men will not understand it, but you have to raise warriors, not parasites. So if you really look at it, we are technically, the way the world is supposed to work is a person is supposed to leave legacy of their grandfather.
True.
Not their father.
Not their father.
The reason, their grandfather. The legacy starts with the grandfather. But there's a cousin that creates right after the grandchild. Right? So, grandfather information is not the easiest thing to do. Because those hardships that your grandfather went through taught him how to survive. It taught him how to save. It taught him how to maneuver around in difficult times. That what he learned, he managed to educate maybe your father, and your father got educated. But there's a lot of things that he hid from your father, and then your father will come in. The first thing that a third world person does is, or a have-not person is, they say, I want to raise my kid in a way where they're not exposed to the poverty that I went through.
Exactly.
We used to sit around and eat and share meat and share one piece of meat. I don't want my kids to go through that. But hey, you might not want your kids to go through that, but at least they should know that you went through that.
True.
Right?
I agree.
I think in third world economics, we forget that it's very important for our kids to know what it takes to be from point A to point B. You might not have them suffer. I'm not saying you should let your kid eat one meat per week. No. All I'm saying is they should know how it is that you got where you are. So the reason why you never see successful offsprings of highly successful politicians is because that information is not very easy to disseminate to a kid, because it's disseminated with practice. I'll give an example. Back in the day, the Rhodesians had a system. I'm not praising Rhodesians. They had a system where they used what they raised their kid on as backup, as safety net for the kids. So if a Rhodesian was a farmer and his son wants to be a doctor, he at least taught his kid how to farm the land, and then use that as backup. If you fail in med school, you come back and be a farmer. So you never go to a Rhodesian farm and see a kid just laying around reading books just because he said
he wants to be a doctor.
No, they would still know when to milk the cows. There's one thing that they were taught here that we don't teach our kids here. Routine. Routine was the kid. You have to make sure that people grow up in routines.
And routine breeds discipline.
Routine is discipline, actually. It's actually one and the same thing. If you really look at it, right. It's the one is actually a precursor of the other. If you really look at it,
I see.
Right? So with that routine, you're going to use that same work ethic to apply. You're going to apply the same work ethic in your med school to become a good doctor, because you know that at 4 a.m. I woke up and milked the cows. If I don't milk the cows at 4 a.m., there's repercussions, negative repercussions. Is that same phenomenon that will make the person who's now a doctor wake up at 4 a.m. and say, hey, I have to run 30 miles. So that my heart is good, I'm going to jog. It's discipline, and it's coming from routine. And when the reason why routines are necessary is they create second nature, so that it doesn't become like a chore to do things that are necessary in life. To make your bed doesn't become a chore, it's routine. So to brush your teeth doesn't become a chore, it's routine.
So let me ask you this. you've described something that is now at a micro level, and you've also combined routine as well as explaining the disconnect between the different periods of how a revolutionary was. The revolutionary that came from the bush was not the same revolutionary during 1980, was not the same revolutionary during the 2000s. And during this whole time, this revolutionary may have had children, but this disconnect that he already was suffering by himself, add to that the grandfathering, the legacy transference was already another issue that was compounded. This is at the micro level, right? Now, if we're looking at this at the micro level, now you add on top the layer that you mentioned, that short-termism in general, right? And then you add the corporatist system that you were describing. And then we take it back to the original topic when you say Zanu PF or Zimbabwe Politics after 2030. It looks as if you've already given the answer, because all these compound issues seem very difficult to actually unravel by themselves. One at a time needs a lot of energy, if I'm not mistaken.
Not really, because they were going to come in and become I was going to try to provide what I think would be a simple solution. All this coming together, they all say one thing. Let's talk investment. Investment is the future of our nation. But we have to understand what investment is and how does it.
That sounds like a buzzword. I apologize to say this. I've heard a lot of intellectuals, even some of our own fellow cadres, say this word. It sounds like a soundbite these days. Whenever you hear a person say investment.
So let me elaborate, and I apologize for them. You're right. Right now, because of short-termism, every political party in Africa, not only in Zimbabwe, is bound to focus on multiplying its electorates, whilst forgetting its citizens.
Yes,
does that make any sense?
I totally agree.
So, why? Because you think if you impress citizens, then someone might just come and lie to them, and then they will become someone else's electorates.
We are creating new tribes without even seeing it.
Right. So because of that was from short-termism. Like, let's give these people, let's solve their bread and butter issues today, especially towards the elections, so that when they go to the ballot box with the stomachs full, they remember who fed them. Right. That can only work once or twice. It will not keep on working. Daniel Arab Moy had this thing where you'd actually go and give a plate of ugali to his followers, and inside every plate, the plate had his face on it, so that when the people finish eating food, they will see his face on there, and with subliminal perception, they would go and vote for him, because anytime the hunger kicks in, he's first king, just like how Coca-Cola advertises. Right. So it can only work for a while. If you remember what happened to Rabbi Arab Moy, it get to a point where it didn't work. As opposed to giving the citizens a better lifestyle that they want to hold on to.
But you said it yourself here, that meshing the two cultures is yes, you are right. It does seem that we as a nation are not aware that we are already in a corporatist type of mentality. But the fact that we are not even aware that we are still moving towards this corporate structure, but fighting with our own cultural and traditional cultural values, we haven't found a connection to that. So how would we even get to that stage to begin with?
Well, first of all,
because now it seems as if I can't even talk about a policy or an idea.
Right, because corporate enlightenment is also a big deal even in advanced countries, right? The finance world is not very easy to teach kids. That's why most immigrants end up in debt, and they actually fail to make it. Corporate culture is actually based on long-termism. You have to know how to plan, you have to know how to invest, you have to know how to disseminate the knowledge to your offsprings, and you have to make sure you control the population within your house itself, within your household.
Yeah, that like linkage in Africa, right. There are so many gaps in that.
Right. So eventually you will notice that most of the problems that people face in life, they're coming in from the code. Everybody's just saying, I want to feed my kids. Right? Have you ever thought what would happen if you didn't have those kids to feed? Where was that money going to go?
It will go to your own self-development.
Right, investment. Then you can have those kids later when you have the money, right?
Yes.
Right? But we rush. We start off with where what siphons the money out first, then we think investment after.
But that can be directly blamed to our own children in our own social norms.
So this is where I'm saying our culture, at that time when we actually thought that was the way to live life. It worked. Life was so simple, right? You have a piece of land. Land was just, you can just go on with a sub-book and then they'll cut you a piece of land and you'll have a piece of land, till the land. Your daughter gets married, gets some cows. Your son gives you some cows. Then your daughter goes to school. It was just like a system. It was self-supporting. It's not the same anymore. There's no one to cut. No one is going to cut your land anymore these days. And if you have many kids here, you're going to have to put them through school, eh?
True.
So there's a time where we actually have to start talking about, okay, where do we draw the line? Where is there any need to reevaluate our customs? Is there any need to look into our tradition and see the good and the bad out of it? There's some things that were good, there's some that were bad. But the whole thing I'm talking about here is adoption and adoption versus and at the same time. Adoption versus adoption. Adoption and adoption.
At the same time.
Yes. When to adopt.
And when to adopt.
And when to adopt. When to adopt, we seem to mix up the two, right? In the end, we don't realize that if you play around with those two, choices vanish. You're only left with options, right? At least grow a life with a choice. Raise our kids with choices and options. When you are desperate, there is never a time for you to have choices and options. You only have options. Eventually, you run out of those options. You become desperate. Now you are going to vote even for a pair of shoes.
Because you no longer have any
right.
options.
So at least, let's create a culture that gives us options and choices at the same time.
So, 2030, how would you see the playing field, the ground, is in taking this into consideration?
Well, watermelon to knife or knife to watermelon.
Yes.
Long-termism has to come into play. Short-termism is not yielding any results. So for that reason, even if we have a one-party system, whether it's genuine one-party system or pseudo one-party system, production has to come in at some point. Otherwise, that one party will end up just creating one implosion after the other. The battle will be within that same party. It will still be a division. An opposition is an opposition. Whether it's coming from within the party or it's coming from outside, opposition is opposition. So unless we remove cronyism, where we surround ourselves with young kids who think they're bringing ideas, but we selected them because we think they're from Kumusha Kwangu, we're going to end up with anything that we're going to end up with is not going to produce there's not going to be any production at all. We are not producing, and we don't have any plans to produce. I think there's somebody out there that think that we'll never run out of resources, which is a big lie.
Right.
The resources we end up we're actually seeing a depletion of resources in other areas right now. So if we ever end up thinking, if we have a short-term leadership that thinks that all we have to do to the people is award them. Let's sell 20 kgs of gold and award them with cars. They'll vote for us. It gets to a point where it runs out. You can't play that all the time. It gets outplayed.
I know we're coming close to the end of our podcast, but your solution is something we've discussed before at one of our previous podcasts. I would tell our listeners to go back to our Amilcar Cabral podcast. You said something about production. Where in Africa, one of the most notable philosophers in the revolutionaries was Amilcar Cabral, an agronomist who believed that yes, we need to use the gun so as to gain our independence, but production and agriculture are the most important thing. This person ended up influencing Sambora Machel, Mondlane, and so forth. You've hit it on the nail about what this is, right? Cabral is very well known by most of our cadres here within Southern Africa and in the Congo. But the same idea you're saying about production has been here for years. We can even go back to Lumumba and so forth. Why is it not being practically...
So because we're studying this at a secondary level, we're not talking about what production is. So for example, in an agrarian or formerly agrarian culture like Zimbabwe, if you're going to wake up tomorrow and have a farm and say you're a farmer, that means you understand what farming is.
Okay.
Owning the farm doesn't make you a farmer.
Seems as if you're going back to that system you were talking about.
Exactly. So the reason why you think that people have been, the word production has been overplayed and no implementation is on the ground yet is because there's no education and enlightenment yet on understanding what production is.
But Cabral used to say the exact same things. During the war, while people were fighting, you would be also making sure that people are being taught that what it means to actually own the land as an indigenous person.
Are we teaching people that here?
No, but I'm saying...
Where have we ever seen a place here where people are taught the actual investment, farming as an investment? Zero. No, everybody's still looking as Panobuda Mari. Everybody's still looking as how does corporate determine the success of a business? If you're buying a business in corporate culture, you have to present records for 5 years. If they're less than 5 years, they have to question them. They need 5 years consistent records. You do not call yourself a business, an entrepreneur, if you have been running your business for 1 year. Because the numbers are not there. There's no numbers enough for you to claim that you're running a business. You don't even have experience in those businesses. If I were to buy your business, I have to see a record for 5 years.
I see.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So we don't look at it that way. We're looking at it like Binda Ugo. People have to understand there's a huge difference between Kurima and farming. Kurima is what we grew up, our fathers grew up doing, waking up at 6. It was cultural. Kurima was cultural. It was actually a culture. Farming is actually a business. It's really a person who has got very good management skills or business management skills will likely make it more in farming than a person who has an agrarian background who went to school for agriculture but without any business and management skills.
I see.
So people also need to learn how to relegate and delegate. You cannot just wake up tomorrow and say, yes, I have a farm. I'm going to get a manager who used to be a manager for a white guy, and then, you know what, he's going to run my farm. It doesn't work like that. There are so many moving parts that involved in team building, in project management. The team building aspect of it goes further than the skills that the person possesses. The human resources aspect of it has to be looked at too. Right? So we have to, we can back farming all the time. Farming this, farming that, but you will notice that only a few people can understand what farming is.
And we can extrapolate this to many other industries as well. Okay.
The intricacies that are involved in farming are so deep and wide to a point where one sector of farming can actually require a course of its own to take within 4 years if you want to be a farmer and do everything yourself, right? Or there's another way. Go and work for a farm for 4 years. Successful farm. Right? But never ever hear people saying there is a successful farmer. This year you're doing tobacco, next year you're doing paprika, next year you're doing goats. If you come to a bank or you go to a finance advisor, they'll tell you that every year you're starting this project, it's your first year in that project. Don't come here and say you've been farming for 5 years. You've been doing goats for 1 year.
I see.
Doesn't mean you've been farming for 5 years.
Well, Uncle, you went deep. And to our listeners, this has been
allow me to say one more thing.
Okay.
If you really want to find out that we're really joking when you look at farming or any other business, is if you look at farm as a part-time job or a recreation, where you have a full-time job somewhere, you're a teacher somewhere, you're a government minister actually, for example, and you own a farm somewhere. Ask yourself, were you going to be able to be a government minister and be a bank manager again at the same time?
Yeah, that introspection and a lot of people.
Right. So what makes you think you can actually run a government or run a ministry or run a school and go and do a full-time job somewhere else too? So that means you look at farming as just a title, right?
Or a hobby.
Yeah, or a hobby, exactly. And you expect production from a hobby.
I think just from this podcast we had today, we need to do a follow-up for our listeners on what exactly is it when you say a system. What is a system? What defines a system? What are the benchmarks a person can actually look into when
the checks and balances?
And balances, because from what we gleaned today here at the Revolutionary Star, you can't even start talking about a policy idea when you don't have a framework
and
order.
Framework and a system, yes.
For you to actually
there's no check. You can't even install checks and balances in that because there's nothing to check.
Right.
There's nothing to balance. There's nothing to check. There's no records coming in.
Yes.
Right.
So basically, it's just a debate participant pitches.
Right.
Because you don't have a framework.
Right.
How are you going to actually get this right off the ground?
We might as well discuss kupusha zvingoro because that's exactly how nothing to pusha zvingoro mangwana ndiri kujega motikari dzinotakurenda kuguruve. That's exactly what the kind of system you're running.
So there you've had it, fellow cadres. Next follow-up podcast, we want to go into another reference strike. As we said, these are all reference strikes for issues we'll be discussing on a day-to-day basis that we will refer you back whenever you want in-depth and substantive conversation on what it means when we now gloss over on what the day-to-day runnings will be happening in our nation. Thank you again to Uncle. We will be inviting him again for a follow-up reference strike on what it is when our uncle here says system, and what do you need as a cadre on a personal micro level to get out of that short-term zone, and at the same time to understand what it means when it means system. Thank you again. to our
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Roger out.